Carmen Sandor, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us on the New Street podcast. It's a very special podcast. It's our fifth episode, so just a very important podcast for us. Thank you for joining us. I'm actually really excited to learn about your story and your background. So I appreciate you coming on the podcast and appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks guys for having me. I'm really excited.
Fantastic. Yeah, and I know we just reached out to you, and when we do the invites, it's a pretty intricate process that we take, and it's when I kind of handpick the folks that we invite, and I always look for somebody with a story, somebody I think other people can learn from. So when I came across your profile, I thought it was really interesting, and I'm really glad that you were able to make it.
Yeah, I try to do as many of these as I can just because it's still early stages of my business, and really how you're going to grow a brand is getting new people to hear about the story and eventually hopefully try the product.
It's important because it's like everybody wants to know about the people behind the business, and I think it just putting a face and putting a story behind something, it makes it that much more impactful. And no, I'm really excited to get into your journey. I really enjoyed going through your CV and just going through all your experiences. I know you played professional tennis for a little bit, and you had a VP role at a financial institution, worked as a reporter for CTV, and now you're the founder and an entrepreneur. So just if you look at all that when it comes to sports, communications, media, and now sort of business and all that, it's just a nice, interesting, diverse set of experiences.
Got lots of skills.
Yeah.
Sure.
So I want to, it's going to be, I'm just fascinated and excited to kind of chat about it. And ultimately, I think it's going to be beneficial for, anybody that tunes in. I think kind of going through it is going to be good insights for everybody. So I wanted to just start off. Do you mind if we dive into your tennis career a little bit? Just to kind of
do it.
Ryan played pro basketball for a bit, and I know you played some tennis. So just kind of wanted to chat about that a little bit and get into that. How many years did you play for?
I started when I was 4 years old. My dad was a professional boxer, and my mom was also pretty athletic. I was born actually in a tiny village in Romania, and we moved to Canada when I was 5 years old. And really, for my parents, being Eastern European and former athletes, it wasn't really an option. I was handed a tennis racket at 4 years old, and it was one of those things where my parents growing up were very deliberate about making sure that I had opportunity. That's why we moved to Canada. And really, sports was kind of the path. And I think, for my parents, they really resented the idea of having a kid that would just kind of hang out at the mall and not do much. So for them, it was pretty clear cut. I was going to play a sport or do something competitive. And it really didn't matter if, I could have picked music or I could have picked anything, but really just something to dedicate myself to, as long as I wasn't one of those kids that kind of use my spare time to not really do something valuable for myself.
A lot of parents, for instance, will say, hey, it doesn't make sense to dedicate all this time and effort into a sport because the likelihood of them having a career or whatever, it's so minimal. But I guess a big question I have for you is, do you feel that experience with your tennis career, what impact has it had on your financial and business kind of career moving forward?
Yeah, I think growing up playing tennis, I wasn't always into it because so much of it was driven by my parents. I was really competitive and I worked really hard. When I was in high school, I was homeschooled actually and did my entire schooling online so I could compete and travel and play and perform. So growing up, I didn't have a traditional upbringing. Even when I was in elementary school, I would wake up at 5, go practice, get to school for 8:30 and leave early and go practice. So very untraditional. And I think as a teenage girl, you start having all these other interests. And for me, I got to the point when I was 14, 15 and where I just wanted to be a teenage girl. And I kind of still had to commit myself to tennis. At that point, I'd been playing for years. I was top ranked in Canada, and my parents, it was kind of those things where why would I quit now? It was so close to getting a university scholarship or playing professionally. But so yeah, I never really loved it at a certain point at 14, 15, 16. But in hindsight, I'm so happy my parents decided to just sit me down and say, listen, I don't care what it is. If you want to quit tennis, pick something else. Right. And so I actually did that. I tried to quit tennis and I tried to pick something else. And my dad said, what do you want to do? I said, I want to be a singer. And my dad was like, okay, well, if you want to be a singer, you have to practice to get good at it just as much as you would at tennis. It's like anything. Right. So I remember for like 3 weeks, my dad had me go and do like boot camp singing, literally practice. It was the same time commitment. And I hated it. I hated it way more than tennis because I wasn't good at it. So my parents forced me to kind of stick with tennis, and I resented it for, my teenage years. But once I got to university, I had a full scholarship. And that's the opportunity tennis presented me. I went to university in the United States, played competitively. And then because of my schooling, I got offered a job at a really amazing place in finance, which I wouldn't have done without tennis. The founder of the hedge fund I worked at, he's a, tennis fanatic. And so there was so much alignment between tennis and what I'm doing. Yeah. And none of those opportunities would have happened without tennis. So I credit tennis for anything that I've ever been able to achieve. It set me up for success, but I didn't always see that, when you're a teenage girl, you think about boys and everything but playing or committing yourself to a sport, basically.
Robert mentioned you went to, was it Penn State that you played tennis at?
I did, yeah.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah.
For me, a lot of skills and tools I learned playing basketball throughout the years really helped me in terms of business, in terms of what it was, like you mentioned, commitment, working with others, so on and so forth. Are there any skills that you learned from tennis that directly apply to what you're doing with your job at the time and maybe the brand that you're building right now?
Definitely just a sense of commitment. I think committing myself to tennis for as long as I have and the hours, even though I didn't necessarily achieve what I wanted. I wanted, to be a top 10 player in the world. That was my dream. I didn't get there, so I failed in a lot of ways, right? But I really didn't fail because I got a great school, great education, great, job afterwards. But in no other thing other than in competitive sports could you commit that much time, do all that, and still somehow feel like you failed. So I think tennis really taught me that you have to work really, really hard and you have to commit yourself and you still fail. But you actually, by committing yourself and giving yourself those hours and that, diligence to becoming better at something, you get further along than you could ever imagine. So I don't think that's a lesson a lot of people see. They start things and stop things often. Unless they achieve something quickly, they don't want to do it. So for me, that long-term commitment to something and that day in, day out, is something tennis taught me.
That's amazing.
That's really amazing, yeah.
We talked a little bit about that point where you're talking about where you failed and you kind of maybe you decided it was time to do something else. I know for me, giving up basketball was huge for me, whether it's psychologically, so on and so forth. How did you make that transition? What made that transition easier for you? And at what point did you know you were ready to go to the business world?
Yeah, I think the decision for me was a little bit different. So I played professionally before I went to university. I traveled around Brazil and South America and lived there and competed. And my parents, like I said, they're immigrants. So, and tennis is not a cheap sport. And it got to the point where my parents are like, listen, we are running out of our savings. We've paid for your tennis. If you're not winning, you can't really keep going. And so despite having professional ranking, despite all these things, I just felt like I was running out of time. I had a lot of anxiety about my parents and their future and my future. So at that point I had, 15 plus scholarship offers to the United States, to a variety of schools that were amazing schools, not just Penn State. And it kind of became a no-brainer. I signed my papers actually while I was in Brazil playing tennis tournaments.
Wow, very cool.
Yeah.
What age is that at? So you were like going right into university?
It would have been 19.
19. Wow, that's amazing to have a whole pro career at the age of before the age of 19. Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, and it happens in tennis a lot. I mean, you see girls turn professional now at 14 years old.
How many years of pro did you have?
So I played my first professional tournament at 16, and so I played 3 years. But to just even get a pro ranking in women's tennis is really hard. You have to play at least 3 tournaments to qualify. Yeah, it's not an easy sport, and for me, it was kind of eye-opening. I was competing against girls that were sleeping in their cars and going out and playing professional matches. And that's kind of reality check. You're like, am I this committed to the sport that I would do something like that? And the answer for me was no. And I loved school. I wanted an education. So I think, that seemed like the best path for me.
I feel like people these days really downplay sports. And again, it's kind of like even parents, it's like you may never make it to that NBA or pro tennis or whatnot level. But what I'm hearing from you is like you've built that sense of commitment early on. That was something that you got from playing tennis. And then you got a scholarship, so you got education. And then you got this networking that you were able to achieve, and that kind of furthered your career. And I feel like when people talk about sports these days, just with everything else that's going on and all the other opportunities in different sectors, I feel like it's still a great way to kind of, the great thing about sports is, your prime is really young, right? Whereas in business, your prime is older. Like there's guys in the 50s that are at their prime in business. So it's a great way to start your career early on and then take advantage of all those things and then get into business just like you did, and just take it to different levels. So that's really cool.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think the greatest lesson from sports that everyone can kind of take from is that there isn't this sense of instant gratification. I think, in today's world, and one thing that's been challenging for me, and I experience this all the time, I launched a brand and I expected it to just fly off the shelves because it's a great product and it's amazing. And there's this story behind it, committing this time I have to building this product and this brand, and it didn't fly off the shelves. And I'm reminded about that's just not the way the world works. I think we feel like that's the way the world works when we see people on Instagram, maybe post a couple of bikini pictures and all of a sudden they're making millions of dollars. But reality is most great things are going to take time and real commitment, and it's not going to be instant gratification. And your likes don't actually make you a better business person or a better leader or allow you to build a brand. So that sense of instant gratification, I didn't have in sports. It was a long build, and the same thing is happening in my business. And now I'm getting used to it and reminding myself.
It's an amazing primer. I never really thought about it until this conversation. Like obviously all, parents always want to put their kids in sports, and it's great. Athleticism, getting out. And it's tough these days because, with the phone and everything going on, it's, I guess, harder to get kids engaged in sports. But I mean, everything you're talking about, it's just a great primer for life, right? Like you said, even just that long-term mindset that you gotta, whether it's 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, you start, or 10 or whatever. It's a long-term thing. And it just, you see the improvement, right? And it's like, and that kind of applies to everything in life, is the more hours you put in, the better you get. And that's what it entails to be good. Yep. That's awesome. So that's tennis story. I wanted to talk a little bit about sort of the finance side. I know you mentioned, I guess, you joined a hedge fund finance company after tennis. And I just wanted to talk about that because I feel like these days the financial literacy and kind of the education system kind of lacks when it comes to teaching kids about finances. And I think it's so important. And, I just kind of wanted to get your take as to how much of those experiences that you had at that company, in the finance world, how much of that kind of has helped you moving along again further in your business. We got some
a little bit of
emergencies, yeah.
Big emergency. Yeah. So I think for me, finance was a very uncomfortable experience because I never studied finance. I actually studied something completely different. And when I got into my role, the place I worked was best in class. They are by all means, if you're investing in fixed income, you're looking at RP Investment Advisors. They are one of the largest alternative asset management firms in Canada. And everyone that works there, it's exactly like you would imagine in the movies, like super well educated, super put together, super on time and punctual, and just that best in class standard. So when I started working there, I had a little bit of imposter syndrome because I didn't feel knowledgeable the way that my colleagues were. Obviously, I had a different skill set, but that was hard to realize right away. So I think the biggest thing I learned from finance is I was surrounded by such great people that it made me excel to that level. And it's one thing I'm struggling actually in my business because I worked at a place that hired the best of the best, and the best was expected from you. You're expected to come in, deliver, not make mistakes, and just put your best foot forward at all times. And that was the sentiment throughout the firm. So when I started a company and all of a sudden I'm interviewing people, it's hard, right? My salary expectations are different. And all of a sudden it's a vodka company. It's not a hedge fund, this glorious job or this glamorous job, whatever it is. So my expectation is still here. And sometimes I'm not getting those candidates. So, but it's about setting your standard. For me, my old employers really set the standard. They expected the best from everyone. And, that's something I've learned in my business. I'm going to wait longer to hire the right people because my expectation and my standard is very high.
That's interesting.
Absolutely.
And I guess in terms of your career, is there something that, in terms of advancing your career in that space, because I know you kind of worked your way up the ranks, is there something that you can say to that in terms of what people you mentioned sort of being punctual and best in class and always kind of having that mindset? I guess maybe that was passed on from the tennis.
I think it was my willingness to put myself out there. So really where I started was a glorified assistant. And within the 7 years I was there, I ended up becoming the youngest vice president at the firm. And I think the big turning point for me was I was given a task during the holiday season. And the task was to deliver our holiday gifts to some of our clients. And it was one of those things where it was eclairs, so these desserts, I would pick them up and I'd have to figure out how to go into all these buildings on Bay Street and deliver these desserts. And what I did, I took a bunch of business cards and all the clients, I did it face to face, each and every single client. And I would introduce myself. Hi, I'm Carmen. I work at RP Investment Advisors. This is our gift for you for the holiday season. And if I had the chance, I'd give them one or two mentions of what we did and how we're doing. And from that, I got all these emails from clients that have never met. I was never client facing. And it was a segue. I would forward the emails to my boss and show her or him at the time that I was trying to connect with people and putting myself out there and representing the firm in a really great way. And I took the opportunity of something that was could have been very meaningless to show a different side of myself. And that pushed me into eventually what was a client-facing role for the firm. So I think one thing that can help people grow within their careers, and it doesn't matter what it is understanding that if there's a gap and it's going to make your boss's life easy. Whatever that task is, find a way to do it really well. And then don't be afraid to tell your boss that you did it, or don't be afraid to put yourself out there. Come prepared and just really any task that you're given, try your very best to make it exceptional.
That's amazing. It sounds like you were a really big asset to that company.
I think everyone at the company, that's the beauty of something that works well and does well, is that everyone plays a role and everyone makes each other better. And I think I played a small role, but I grew into what I wanted to be at the firm, and all the people around me helped me. So yeah, it was an amazing experience.
We talked about a couple different things there, and I just want to know, if you were to say like one thing that has really helped you, I know we talked about sort of the tennis experiences and kind of the commitment there and the networking and all that, but if there was just one thing, if you could sum it down to one thing that's really helped you be competitive in all these different industries in terms of sports, and I know you had you were in communications for a bit and finance, and now in your own business, is there one thing that you think would sum it up in terms of what's really helped you be successful?
I don't know if there's one thing. I think each experience teaches you something different, and your failures definitely teach you just as much. For me, I don't feel like I reached my potential in finance or in tennis. And now, so with my business, it's all about what did I do that I can do better? I'm not going to feel that way. So I think each experience teaches you, and you fail at something all the time. Even if you've done well, you still, I'm sure, can find failure in it as well. So taking the good and the bad and kind of just analyzing, being self-reflective on your experiences and trying to do better each and every time. Even within my business, this last year that since I've launched the company, I've learned more than any other experience in my life ever. The learning curve was so steep. And at times it's really hard as an entrepreneur. You have these emotional roller coasters and a deep sense of failure if you're looking at your competitors, you're looking at other people that have launched businesses that have done so well. So it's hard not to feel that. But when I really actually subjectively look at it, I've done so much in a year. And if I had to do it again, I would do it better and faster. And so I'm taking that knowledge, and hopefully the next 3 years, I'm going to make it even better. Right. So I think just, self-reflection is probably the biggest thing for me.
I love it. I mean, failure and just progress and learning from your mistakes. I think you're right. Like, that's kind of the self-reflection, but I think that's really the key. I would say that, in terms of that one thing, I think that's it. It's just kind of continuously kind of being committed to growing and learning and getting better.
I think you've done a great job talking about, where you come from, the skill sets that you've developed over the years. You mentioned there's a story behind, Green Owl and the brand you're building now. I'm dying to know, what's behind that. Talk to us a little bit about Green Owl, what you're building over there. We're super curious.
Yeah, so Green Owl started really because first of all, I always wanted to be an entrepreneur. So during my time in finance, I had experimented with a bunch of different business ideas. And one of them happened to be starting to import alcohol. I was on a vacation in Mexico and found this brand I loved that wasn't in Ontario. And I said, how hard could it be to start importing it and selling it in Ontario? So I went through that whole process, and it was a funny side hobby. I would, I imported, it's called Noble Coyote, and it's mezcal. And I started by importing 52 cases or whatever. And I wasn't able to sell it through the LCBO. So I sold it to bars and restaurants, and I'd be working 7 a.m. in finance and be done around 6:30, 7 p.m. And then at night I would go and try to get bars and restaurants to purchase this product and put it in their cocktails. And I love the industry, but I didn't have control of the brand, and supply was really challenging dealing with foreign country. So I just was like, why don't I make my own brand? And what do I drink? Because I really didn't drink mezcal all the time. And what I do drink is vodka. But the problem with traditional vodka is that it burns. Or if it's really high price point, it's still not that smooth.
Right.
So it was just really hard to find a good vodka that I could enjoy all the time. And so I started drinking wine, but that gave me hangovers. Tequila gives me hangovers. So vodka is really my drink. I just needed to figure out a way to make it better.
Right.
And to me, I was a competitive athlete and I like to drink clean. So on ice or with just soda, a splash of lime. You don't need to mix it with a ton of sugary stuff. You can make your life easy and just have a really great product that you enjoy in a really simple way. So that's really where the idea to start a vodka company started. And from there, it was a progression. I kind of looked at what else was out there. If it was flavored, it was sugary, which I knew was a no.
Right.
If it was straight, it burned, which I didn't want. So it was kind of working backwards. And green tea is something I drink all the time. It has a ton of health benefits. And it was naturally kind of just made sense. And so I, spent 3 years making this recipe. And it's the only green tea vodka in North America. It got into the LCBO on the first try, which is quite unusual. It takes most brands 6 to 7 years to get into the LCBO. Yeah. And here we are. Very unique product. And I think it checks all those boxes. It's light, it's natural, and it's super smooth. People usually just have it with ice or soda and a splash of lime.
Man, now I'm really wishing you were in person. So
I wish you came through with a bottle. We can just do a taste test.
I'll stop by next week when I'm in your hut. So.
But honestly, like for me, when I hear of, a lot of the liquor companies, it's a lot of celebrities. And I feel like just thinking of starting a liquor business, I think it's cool and awesome. I'd love to do something like that. But to me, it's like, unless I have $1 million and a celebrity endorsement, I feel like it would be so hard for me to get my head around doing something like that. I guess just because I just assume that this industry is whatever, competitive and hard to, hard barrier to entry. But how do you get your head around like going into that and just like saying, F it, I'm going to do this. And like, how does that, is that kind of what you were thinking, or were you more optimistic?
Yeah, I honestly didn't think about the money and I didn't think about the hurdles. It was a natural thing. I wanted to start a brand. How hard could it be? And then each step I would do it. And to actually make the recipe itself wasn't expensive. What's expensive with alcohol is marketing, really. And you're right, it is hard because celebrities aren't spending 3 years making a good recipe. What they're typically doing, and what celebrity brands are usually, is someone will come to them with a product and they'll try it and say, oh yeah, I could cash out on this. Yep. And to me, that does happen. And you sometimes get good products out of that. And you sometimes get really bad products that just happen to have crazy valuations because there's a celebrity behind it. Mm-hmm. And what I think is happening now, I think customers and consumers are becoming much smarter. And there's something to be said about an authentic story. I don't know if Kendall Jenner is in Mexico chopping some agave up and making her tequila. What I do know is that I'm doing this day in, day out. I spent a considerable amount of my life coming up with this recipe, and it's a really good product. And I think that story, even though it doesn't resonate maybe like a celebrity brand will right away, I think in the next couple of years it will. And I think the more people get to try it and actually see for themselves as to what the product is and all the time and energy that went into it, it's going to eventually, become the success it should be. But it's going to take time. And again, we come back to this concept of putting your energy forward and building things gradually. So yeah, I could get a celebrity to endorse it, but it's just not authentic. Yeah. At the end of the day, it was my time and energy, and all the people that work at Green Owl work so hard on this product. And I think that's the story. And so we're not a celebrity brand, but I think I'm okay with that.
No, I love the story. I think that it's just, well, you mentioned, I don't know what the price is, but you mentioned like the price point is reasonable and it
doesn't burn. That's a big one.
It's kind of light, and when I think about it, it's like it's hard for me to say, hey, there's space in the market, but when you explained it in terms of, this kind of niche where, it's true, there really isn't anything. Vodkas are pretty rough and yeah, the ones that aren't, but even are pretty pricey. So I could just imagine having a cup right now and just tasting them. I got it. So, but it's available at LCBO, so I can go somewhere close by and pick one up.
Yeah, we have a couple locations at a couple of the LCBOs in Oakville as well as Burlington, right beside you guys. So
that's amazing.
Perfect. I wish we would have known that before this.
Next time I'm in the area, I'll happily do a tasting for you.
Sounds good. Can we talk a little bit? How far into this are you? How many years are you into this? Where do you come from? What stage is the business in? Where are you going next?
Right. So I started the recipe, as I mentioned, making the recipe and figuring out what I wanted the product to be about 3 years ago. We just got into the LCBO last year. So we applied 2 years ago and we got into the LCBO last year. And really what's happening now is we are currently just trying to build our business in Ontario. What we're learning is that, this product is also got some appetite on the West Coast. So the next goal would be to be in BC, to be in California. I definitely think the green tea vodka and just everything that it represents and the story would fit perfectly out West. But also, it was COVID when we launched this product. So
it's a COVID baby. There you go.
It was, yeah. So we launched it at the end of June last year, and just launching a new brand is hard enough. Right. When you launch a completely unique product where people can't actually try it face to face, it's so much harder. Mm-hmm. So people aren't going to walk by the shelf and pick up green tea vodka, right? But if they try it and they know the story, then there's a good chance they'll pick it up. So much of the business, the first 6 months of the business was just how can we get people to try it in a COVID environment? And it was really expensive and really challenging. But now finally things are open and we're able to actually sample the product in the stores. And it's made a huge difference in my business, honestly. It's just such a different thing when you can try something in person in the same store where you're purchasing it. Right. And I'm really excited to actually let more and more people get a sample of the product and see what it's all about.
That's amazing.
I think when you break that American market too, that would be huge, as you were talking about earlier, right? The more people you get on this, the better.
Yeah, it's kind of one of those situations where you don't want to just launch a product. And this is what I learned in Ontario, because when I launched Green Owl, I was actually still working another job. So when I launched the product, I didn't even expect to get into the LCBO. I mean, I knew how great the product was, but I also knew how challenging it was to get into the LCBO. And we got in right away, which I think speaks to how amazing the product is. And when I launched the product, I didn't have a marketing background. So I didn't know really how to grow the brand. I just had an amazing product. And, it turns out it's not enough to just have that. People need to know the story and they need to try the product and then they might purchase it. So I think I'm taking that knowledge that I've learned this past year. And when we do go to the United States, there's going to be definitely more of a strategy and a plan in place. Right. Something to really actually help build the brand versus what I did in Ontario was kind of just, it was on the shelf and no one really knew what it was and no one could try it. And there was no real marketing behind it. So that's definitely an area of the business that's changed and it's starting to show. So yeah, the US market's exciting, but we're going to be ready when we get there.
For sure. That's super exciting. I'm really excited to see the marketing campaigns and what you roll out. That's awesome. Before, you mentioned also when you were at the financial firm that you kind of had this idea that you wanted to do something and you tried a couple of things. Like, how early on did you know that you wanted to, be an entrepreneur or own something and do something on your own?
I think I wanted from a very early age to be an entrepreneur. You know, my parents always encouraged me to take risks in life, which is funny because when I quit my job in finance, they're like, why would you? But, you know, I think the overarching theme is my dad especially always encouraged me to really believe in myself and kind of take a chance on in life. And there's things more important than money or fame or success. Being proud of something you've built is something that's worth pursuing. So I think, you know, being an entrepreneur, I've always wanted to be one. And when I started even in finance, I was always thinking of business ideas. I had a couple of funny ones. I had an app that was kind of like a dating app, but for sports. So if I wanted to play tennis with someone and I couldn't find a partner, I'd have to, you know, match with them. And you'd have to have like your rating and all this. So that was one. And then I started a muffin company, which was people don't have healthy options in the morning for breakfast. You're either having like a $20 smoothie or you're eating a Cliff Bar, or if you have to sit down for breakfast, it takes too much time. You're having a full egg breakfast. So I came up with this muffin company that was high protein. The idea was to deliver it to the trading floors that, you know, the guys get in at 7 a.m. They're not eating any healthy breakfast. Or gyms that are opening and customers are leaving and want to actually eat something versus just a smoothie or a bar. So I had a couple of ideas, but, you know, this is the one that kind of stuck, and here we are.
I think there's a real passion behind it too. I think that might, you know, I'm sure you're passionate with the other things, but it sounds like something that you're definitely, you know, thinking about for a long time. I think passion is huge in anything that you do. You know, if you're not enjoying what you're doing, you know, it's very, very short-lived for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
What would you say was sort of the biggest hurdle? I know we talked about it a little bit, but if there's a specific thing when it comes to starting your own, whether it's your business or a liquor business, what would you say was the biggest hurdle?
I think every stage kind of feels like a hurdle. Yeah. I look at what's ahead of me and I feel like that's the hurdle. So it really is one of those things where so far the biggest hurdle, it seems like it wasn't even a hurdle when I look back on it, honestly, when I look at what's in front. But getting started is always the biggest hurdle for most entrepreneurs. I mean, taking that first step, actually coming up with an idea and even trying to pursue it. Ideas are just ideas until you start doing it. So I think for most entrepreneurs, as well as myself, is that always that taking that first step. That's the hurdle.
Yeah. Just so you know, I cut out there on the screen. I guess my phone went out, but we're still good. We're recording separately, so you can still hear me, right? Yeah.
Yep, I got it.
Yeah, so I mean that's it. You know, taking that first step is always the hurdle, and there's many hurdles along the way for sure. Is really interesting, kind of learning more about you and your story. In terms of Green Owl specifically, is there anything in terms of the name or any backstory? I mean, obviously, I love the story of kind of, you know, how you created the recipe and spent your time, and it's such a quality product that has a specific niche market in sort of the vodka landscape that fills but is there anything more behind it, or?
Yeah, I mean, Green Owl because of the green tea, obviously, and tea keeps you up at night. So, you know, to me, owls are these really wise, amazing animals, and it kind of made sense. I tried a couple of different ideas and played around, you know, grasshopper vodka, grass court vodka, because I used to play tennis and I love, you know, grass court. So there's a lot of ideas, but this stuck. And if you actually take a really good look at the label, it's super intricate. It's super detailed.
Attention for sure.
And it took a long time to actually, you know, figure out those details. The designer behind it, Zhao, he's amazing. He's a partner in the business, and yeah, every detail. There's a heart as the nose of the owl. You can see a little feather in the O. So it was just, it was a natural fit. And I think it's one of those things when you know, and definitely when we saw the original owl label that Jow came up with, it made sense, and we didn't even have to look anywhere else.
Yeah, I think you, I just want to touch on quick, you mentioned being very selective in your hiring process because you're looking for people who are doing certain things. Can you talk a little bit about how big the team is now and what's the plan for growth in that department? What are you guys looking for next?
Yeah, so the amazing thing about today now is that you can actually outsource a lot of different things in your business. For me, the team currently is three. There's three of us. I don't ever plan or don't think, or who knows, but don't see it getting past 10, 12 people. And, the majority of it is going to be sales and marketing. Obviously, operations is important. But at this stage of the business, it's so important. Every person you bring on immediately adds value if they're good. So I think part of what I was saying was just that no matter who I hire at this stage, I made the mistake of hiring someone early on in the business that was an amazing person, but their skill set didn't necessarily complement the brand. And so now when I hire people, I'm very, very specific. Every detail and objective that they have is already planned, which is not something, and you learn this with experience. When I first hired people, it was kind of just like, let's hire them and they'll help. But even really people with a lot of experience need direction, and people can't read your mind, and having a plan for anyone that comes on and exactly what you want out of them, or what you're expecting for them to add value to the business. And that's definitely something I learned this past year.
100%.
That's amazing. That's awesome. I know you were recently featured in a Global Mail article written by Wahida Harris titled "Breaking into the Boys Club: How 3 Women Succeeded in a Male-Dominated Profession." Honestly, I feel like you're gonna go much further than succeed. You're gonna dominate in this industry, and I'm really looking forward to trying out the vodka. I really, we gotta do a follow up, and we'll do something interesting with some taste testing on site.
Yeah, we'll definitely have to do a taste test.
Fabulous. Okay, Carmen, really thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate it. Thank you for your time. It's been amazing. I think your story is amazing, and we got a lot of good insights today. So appreciate that, and we'll keep in touch as we kind of finish up the production and everything.
Thank you so much. Yeah, guys, I really appreciate the time. Hank, oh my gosh, you're so much